The Doctor stormed back into the room he had arrived in, still a tattered mess from the taking of his TARDIS, and Stewart was close behind him. As the Brigadier watched, the Time Lord ran his finger through the dust where his time machine had once stood, drawing lines in the ground with absolute precision. A circular shape with more swirled lines within it. It seemed to resemble the markings which had flashed up on the screen when the Doctor had fed his sonic screwdriver's readings through the system. It was Time Lord, then. It had to be, he thought to himself as he watched the old man scamper about. Doctor, I don't mean to interrupt you, but if you're going to have some sort of breakdown, this is hardly the time to start scribbling symbols on the floor, he sighed. We've got less than 3 hours before the ice field makes landfall on the eastern seaboard of the US, and then people start dying, Doctor. But the Time Lord never flinched, simply holding up a finger and shushing him. Doctor, I say, old man, are you even listening to me? Probably. I'm not sure. I wasn't paying attention, the Doctor replied quickly, scurrying back and forth and finishing his masterpiece on the floor. The Brigadier peered at it over his shoulder. Nope, he had no idea what it was. Just then he noticed the Doctor do it again. He looked up at him for the briefest moment with this blank, almost tragic expression on his face, but no sooner had he noticed than the old Time Lord had glanced away back to his work. It's the mark of Rassilon, Brigadier, an old Time Lord seal. You see, I wasn't able to fully focus on my TARDIS the last time I attempted to make contact, but this seal should enclose my mental patterns and allow me to hone in on the old girl. You don't want a ring of candles or anything, do you, Doctor? The Brigadier sighed. You know, sometimes I don't know which is worse with you. The science gobbledygook I understand none of, or the hocus-pocus nonsense I don't believe in. The Doctor chuckled to himself, lowering himself down into the middle of the seal and crossing his legs. He rested both hands on his knees and glanced up at the Brigadier. Now, absolutely no noise at all, understand? He reminded him, and the Brigadier sighed again. It's of paramount importance that I'm not disturbed. If my subconscious mind becomes severed from my physical body, I could become lost in the shadow zone forever, and then you'll really be stuck. Just do whatever you need to do, Doctor. Time is running out, Stewart reminded him. The Doctor shot him a quick wink and closed his eyes. His breathing began to slow, his mind began to empty, and his heart began to beat more subtly. The room around him faded from his mental screen, and the time vortex began to form around him once again, whistling by his ears as his memories passed him by. He could hear old companions nattering away in his ear, and there was a faint ringing in the distance. None of these noises were the one he was looking for. And then he could hear it. Really far away in the void, the sound of those ancient engines rearing and groaning. He could almost picture the console in his mind, the central column rising and falling as he started to close in. But then there was something else there. Another noise. What was that? It started to fill his mind, almost drowning out the whine of the engines. It sounded like singing. Yes, that's definitely what it was. It was singing, accompanied by the familiar crackle of a record player. Nope, he had to focus, ignore the singing and focus on the TARDIS. He was so close. But the music started to skip, repeat itself as though the record player was skipping over and over on the same lyric. He couldn't quite make it out. What was it saying? It sounded like time. Time, 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 the record repeated over and over again. The Doctor sighed to himself. Oh, no, not again. He crossed the room, that big Victorian-looking room, between the arching iron posts. Wait a minute. He froze in his steps. Where am I? He glanced around. This was definitely the TARDIS. The column in the middle gave that away, and the groaning and whining engines made it clear that it was his TARDIS too. But it was all wrong. His sterile scientific fortress of isolation was unusually warm, filled with earthy browns in place of cold white and grey. There were books all over the place, and by all the stars, they weren't even alphabetized, just scattered about like nobody's business with no attempt at any kind of system. Time, 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 the record continued. Oh, for heaven's sake, the Doctor muttered, crossing the room and reaching for the record player while his eyes still traversed the strange room. And then his hand touched something. Not the cold material surface of the record, but something warm, with the texture of flesh, and something which felt fundamentally wrong to the touch. He glanced down, and jumped so high he almost regenerated on the spot from the shock. There was another hand reaching for the exact same record, a hand he had just touched. With a sudden flinching motion, the Doctor leapt backwards and held up his arms, ready for an attack. and then paused, confounded, as the other man mirrored him almost exactly. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" the other man demanded firmly. The doctor studied him closely. There was a boyish charm about this stranger. His long locks of dark brown hair, his perfectly chiseled complexion, and those eyes. Even he could get lost in those eyes. He glanced down at what the man was wearing, his judo stance growing more and more relaxed. A 3/4-length velvet coat, a waistcoat beneath it with a bronze patterning, and a fob chain to match. With a dress sense like that, there was only one man this could be. "Oh, now how did that happen?" the doctor scowled. "What are you doing here? Where's my TARDIS?" The other peered at him curiously, his eyes turning almost to slits. "Oh, don't do that." "Do what?" the other replied, and the doctor flung his hand out. "That thing, the thing with the eyes. I can barely see them when you do that. You look like a shrew," he muttered. His stance completely faded and he straightened himself up, walking around to the left as the other mirrored him and circled right. "And I don't mean to criticize, well, actually, scratch that, I do, but are you going to a fancy dress party or something? What is with that get-up? Oh!" He froze on the spot. "Of course! I remember now. That's the best that they had at the morgue." "Well, you're a fine one to talk about clothes. Where did you get yours? Did you burgle a homeless man?" the other sneered, and the doctor allowed himself a sarcastic smile. "Oh, that's good. That's very good," he replied. "We can't all be the big Americanized romantic hero, you know." "What do you mean?" the other asked him. "Oh, you know what I mean," the doctor glared back, suddenly flailing his arms around as he taunted. "Oh, help me, I don't know who I am, but maybe if you snog me again it'll all come flooding back. Oh, I'm half human, or at least I think I am, I'm not sure, kiss me again. Stop it!" The other man held up both his hands. "How do you know all this? Who are you?" The doctor straightened himself right up and ran his hands back through his hair. "Who is exactly who I am?" he said slowly. "Still not catching on? My goodness, I was slow." The two stood for a moment staring straight at one another, before both made a move to their jacket pocket. With slow, deliberate movements they drew their sonic screwdrivers, and the doctor took a step forward, tapping his against the side of the other's, creating a massive spark as they touched. "Same screwdriver, 2 different points in time. I wonder what would happen if I tapped the side of your head." "Don't, I get it," the other doctor finally said, taking a step back and looking himself up and down. "So, we really let ourselves go that badly in the future?" The doctor scowled and thrust his screwdriver back into his coat. "I choose not to get out very often," he growled, straightening the collar of his coat. The other doctor chuckled to himself and popped his screwdriver away. "Still doesn't explain why you're here. Pretty sure you're breaking all the laws of time just by standing in my console room," he said slowly. The doctor shuffled awkwardly and stared at the floor, muttering something under his breath. The other doctor couldn't make it out. "I'm sorry, what was that?" "I lost my TARDIS," the doctor repeated quietly, and the other doctor exploded into laughter, holding the side of the console for support. "Oh, shut up!" "Oh, that is priceless. I haven't laughed that hard since I was an old man, thank you." He laughed. "Well, you can't have mine," he pointed out. "I don't want yours." "It would take me another 12 lives just to get all the books in order," the doctor snapped back. "I was attempting to psychically contact my console, but you had your music turned up so darn loud I could hear it in the shadow zone." The other doctor sniggered to himself, still enjoying the thought of his older self having lost his own time machine, before gathering himself and taking a deep breath. "What happened to it?" he asked, suddenly serious, as though he'd only just noticed that he'd have to do all this again when his time came around in the future. "Ice Warrior attacking the Earth with some kind of freezing cannon," the doctor explained. "I shouldn't even tell you that, but there's enough temporal distortion in my timeline at the moment to—" He froze mid-sentence, his eyes slowly widening and his face lighting up as a grin slowly crawled across it. The other doctor retracted a little. This was not a face designed for smiling. "That's it!" the doctor exclaimed. The Brigadier stretched back in his chair. His whole body was aching. As he glanced at his watch, he realized why. He'd been here nearly 14 hours. It must have started to catch up on him. He looked down to the doctor, frozen to the spot, still meditating with his eyes fastened shut. Every so often his eyebrow would twitch or the corner of his mouth would quiver slightly, like someone lost in a dream, but he never stirred. Stewart pondered for a moment about the look his old friend kept giving him, that distant, faraway glance with just a hint of sadness lurking at the back. He'd seen that look on the doctor before, and he stared at the Time Lord while he thought. His throat was beginning to dry from being silent for so long, but he daren't disturb the doctor in this state. Something about being lost in the shadow zone or something like that. He gave a slight shudder. The freezing winds outside were beginning to make their way indoors. He looked over to the doctor again. He had to come out of it soon. There was no telling how much more time they had left to delay. "No, absolutely not. Out of the question," the other doctor was saying. "It's bad enough that you're here at all. Do you have any idea how messed up the continuum will be if I bring my TARDIS anywhere near your timeline?" He walked around the side of the console, but the doctor went the other way and met him on the other side. "No, don't you see? It has to work," he said back. "Those distortion engines are programmed to transmat the TARDIS onto Skaldak's ship, but they can't do that with my TARDIS already at the exact same coordinates." "But the consequences of crossing two identical TARDISes would be catastrophic. It could tear a hole in reality itself," the other doctor argued, and the doctor held up both his hands defensively. No. The resulting paradox will create a temporal feedback loop," he explained. "The engines won't be able to handle the malfunction. My TARDIS will be released and returned to Norway, while yours materializes aboard Skaldak's ship." The other doctor paused, fiddling with the instruments on his console. "It's too dangerous," he said finally. "There's no guarantee the feedback wouldn't crack the planet like an egg." The doctor let out a violent huff and went the other way around the console, scratching his head with both hands, so roughly that he might have caused sparks from the static. "I'm sorry, Doctor, I've put far too much effort into saving that planet to let you risk tearing it apart." Oh, you've put too much effort in. You. The doctor scoffed. "Add an extra couple of years' worth of world-saving to your score and you might be on the same leaderboard as I am." He let out a breathless sigh and leant against the controls, pondering for a moment. Then a look came across his face, and a subtle smile crept along his lips. He wandered slowly around the console, looking down at the bizarre controls. "Why all the wood?" "I'm sorry?" the other doctor asked, his face creased with confusion. The doctor pointed at the console. "You've got everything all in wood and Roman numerals. What's that all about?" He walked round to the other side of the destination counter, putting his fingers on them and spinning them. "And what's this all about? You think all planets use Earth's calendar? There are worlds out there with 3 months in a year, and they're all named after brands of fruit juice." "I know, I've been," the doctor argued back, walking around the console to stand in front of him. "Now, if you don't mind, I would like to get back to my book." He reached over and twisted a dial. The doctor pushed a lever over. "You've read it 18 times, he bickered, tapping a few buttons without even looking. The other doctor turned switches while glaring straight back. "It's a darn good book, I'll have you know." "I know. I've read it 39 times. "Oh, you've done everything more than me, haven't you?" "No, not everything. You've snogged more companions," the doctor snapped while pulling down the primary lever. The engines thudded and the central console started to heave and groan. The other doctor suddenly looked up frantically and ran around the side, twisting the dials. "What have you done, you mad fool?" he shouted desperately. "You've locked the controls. We're heading for Earth." The console sparked violently and the monitor flashed with the words "paradox detected." "I can't change the coordinates." "Well, of course you can't. You twisted the flight controls to automated, not noticing that I had altered the destination coordinates, which I locked in with the auxiliary control lever," the doctor explained casually. "But I knew that's what you were doing, and I entered a manual override into the TARDIS command circuit," the other doctor protested, and the doctor smiled a little. "I know you did, which is why I used the regulatory system to reroute all power to the other side of the console. Better luck next time." He shrugged his shoulders a little. The whole room lurched violently to the right. The other doctor straightened up, and his scowl faded. "Nicely played, Doctor," he smiled. "Thank you, Doctor."